Well, good morning. Thank you, Sister Bernadette. I'm wondering, wouldn't each one of you like to be introduced by Sister Bernadette? You know, she can take someone who has no qualification and make him sound like a superstar. So here we are. Actually, I do want to add to her introduction. I want to give you another piece of my connection with Father Thomas and with his centering prayer material. Sister Bernadette had all the facts right, but actually I first met Father Thomas in 1958, in that summer. I just finished my junior year in high school, and my mother, father, another brother, and I went to Snowmass to visit my other brother, who was a monk in the community there. And while I was there, I talked with Father Thomas about the possibility of me becoming a monk after I graduated the following year. So we had a nice talk and set things in place. A year later, right after my graduation and my birthday, which were about on the same day, Father Thomas advised that I take 2 weeks to mature and grow up, as it were. Get a little sense of the world and worldly wisdom. And then I showed up on the doorstep, the end of June of '59. And Father Thomas actually was one of the principal reasons why I chose to take the trip 2,000 miles from the East Coast to a monastery here in the mountains. I've since grown to love the mountains, and they were beautiful, but they weren't an attraction for me. It was Father Thomas and his teaching. So he got to be my first abbot, I'll call him. Now, as a beginner, a novice, your spiritual interaction is primarily with the novice master. That's who you'll be seeing every few days in classes and so forth. But every few weeks, we get the chance to go see the abbot and have a talk with the abbot. Now, if you're imagining sitting in comfortable chairs and just kind of chatting about the weather, forget it, because in those days as Trappist, when the novice went in to see the abbot, he knelt on the floor, and it was a tile floor, and would put out his heart. In the rule of St. Benedict, in the degrees of humility, which is the core of the rule, the 5th degree of humility is that the monk reveal to his spiritual father all that goes on inside him, the secret thoughts of his heart. Just pour it out in total trust so that it can be healed and educated. So that's what I would do. And Father Thomas, if you know him, totally clean desk there, except for a little notebook at the top corner of his desk. And as I'd be talking and pouring out my heart and all that was going on, once in a while he'd slide this notebook down and make a little entry in it. And I never knew quite what he was doing, because he writes very small. If you've gotten a note from Thomas, and they say intelligent people write small. And I'm kind of looking at it upside down, so I never got a clue what that was about. But he would be just doing that. Now, I had my full 2 years of novitiate with Father Thomas as superior. And the very day that I completed my novitiate and made my simple vows, right after that ceremony, we got a phone call from Spencer that the Abbot of Spencer, Dom Edmund, had just resigned. And there would be an election in 3 weeks, and Spencer would have a new abbot. Well, it turns out the new abbot was Father Thomas. So he left Snowmass and was the Abbot of Spencer. He would come out and visit us at least once a year, because Spencer overlooks what's going on at Snowmass, especially in those days, because we were not yet an independent abbey. So I had that much of a connection with him. Now, after he was abbot for 20 years, as Sister Bernadette said, he resigned Abbot of Spencer and rejoined us at Snowmass. And he was made the guest master. And as guest master, he began thinking about how do you put out the contemplative life so people can take it in. And they had been working on centering prayer at Spencer, and he began to think of how can I make that available, and began putting together this program in the early '80s. And that was what he was doing, and I'm just enjoying his presence back in the community, and I'm sitting there listening. And then one day, as he began to put out this particular section of his material, my jaw dropped. He was talking about the false self system and the false happiness programs. And I realized those notes. I had been his model for the false self and false happiness programs. Father Thomas himself is too innocent to know what a false self is. But I gave him all his material that he could work with. So if there's question and answer later, that's my area of expertise. We can get into that. So what I would like to do with you this morning is pick up this theme of listening, which the National Office made the theme for the year. And when I first heard that the theme was going to be listening, I felt, well, good, that's an activity. I suppose year by year they're going to go down different activities we do and see what's going on with it. But as I got into looking at it and praying over it and trying to bring together some material in my mind and heart, I got an idea of just how important listening is for life in general, for our lives together, communication. But especially how important it is for our spiritual lives. It's at the core of our spiritual lives. Without listening, there is no spiritual life. It all begins in this listening. So I got more interested in the project and put more attention to it and more prayer to it. And what I came up with, which is what I want to share with you, is actually not a lecture, but I want to present a spectrum of images and stories, real stories. And let these images and stories reach down into your heart and evoke from you whatever meaning resonates with you regarding each of these elements in our process. I'm hoping that when I have all these stories out, I will have put them out in some order and woven them into something of a tapestry, so it's not just helter-skelter. And I'm hoping that if it's in a tapestry and you can get the sense of the order, you'll be able to remember. And then later on, draw back on this and find out, how does this really fit my life? What's it saying to me? What can I do with this listening? So, first story. I call it The Restaurant. Imagine that in this group here, there's so many of us that know one another. I've seen you from the monastery, and different ones of you know each other from different places, that instead of this bag lunch downstairs, we were going out to a restaurant. And 10 of us are in a group and want to stay together, so we asked the maitre d' if he can set us up together. And he does find this big round table, and all 10 of us are sitting around this round table. And we decide we're not going to break down into small conversations around the table, but there'd be one conversation shared with the whole table. Now, as we get seated and get in place and the conversation gets started, at a given point in the conversation, the person speaking is the person at the far end of the table from me. And this person is speaking with a very soft and gentle voice. So this is a real challenge for listening. But this isn't the half of it. The person's voice is not simply there alone, but it's in the midst of a whole lot of sound in the restaurant. You could even say a whole lot of noise. Other people are coming in, and people are getting up from the table and going out. The waiters are putting down silverware and picking up the old dishes. The people at the table are rustling around and doing their various things. The person sitting next to me is swishing his martini and the ice is hitting the side of the glass and tinkling along, you know. So you have all this sound that's competing with that gentle voice. And so it's getting harder and harder to hear and, of course, to listen. But this is still not all of it. If you're an extrovert, and perhaps if you're an introvert, you notice something else, which is there are other conversations going on in the room. And in fact, the person right behind me is closer to me than the person at the far end of my own table. And that person is speaking louder. Perhaps they've been drinking a little bit, and the voice has gone up. And besides that, they're talking about something that's interesting. He's giving a critique on the morning session here. And it's like, whoa, this is kind of interesting. So part of the attention is going back and picking up this conversation. It's kind of confessions of an extrovert here. And also, maybe another conversation or two, little pieces of it are coming in. So you realize what we're up against, trying to hear and listen to this gentle voice at the other end of our table. Huh? Now, what's important for me in this image, for me, is I'm wondering, to what extent is this an image of my life? And in particular, to what extent is this an image of my prayer life? When I want to come and listen to that gentle voice of God, how much distraction is going on? How many other conversations are going on? And how am I dealing with that? Okay, in the example, I got to wondering, you know, if you've done your math, I'm 65, and my hearing is going down, clearly. I get it tested every 3 years, and it's gone down a little bit each time. And so the last time I was there, and this is truthful, I asked the doctor, would somebody with my hearing loss start thinking about a hearing aid? And he said, no, not usually. Unless it was a man here and his wife was standing right over him saying, he gets a hearing aid. So I said, all right, I don't have a wife standing over me, so I'll just keep going here. But I would run into these situations in a restaurant, so I was still curious. I asked a couple people I knew that had gotten hearing aids, do you think that will help me? And they said, no, not really, because the hearing aid simply amplifies all sound indiscriminately. And what you want is focused sound. So it just makes the problem worse in some cases. It just makes all of the noise louder. So that's not the answer. The answer is not just amplifying all the sound. The answer is somehow focusing all my energy on that gentle, soft voice. It means taking my interest in these other conversations and shutting it down. Interesting as they are, I don't want them right now. Stop listening to those. It means those other sounds that are going on, to the extent that I can mentally deal with them, push them out of the scene, so that all that's left for my attention and my focus is that single, soft, gentle voice. So that's the first point I'll call a dimension of listening or a condition of listening. It's the need for us to focus on this voice of God, to pull together our attention and put it here, to take our energy back from these distractions and put it with that listening, to be attuned to God and what God is saying. So that's the first point. And without that, there is no listening. So if we don't get past this first step, there's no listening in our lives. But supposing we get there, and we're now listening, for the second point I want to make, I'm going to tell you a story. A real story happened. I'm not embellishing it even. It happened about 25 years ago, but I remember it like it was just yesterday, because it was a great learning experience for me. In those days, 25 years ago, the main support for the monastery financially was our egg business. We had chickens, produced these eggs, processed them, and sold them to the local restaurants and supermarkets.